everyone. This is Nadia Hernandez from Wings. We are very happy to have you all here for this very special session that we are co-hosting with the International Center for Not-for-Profit Law, ICNL. Today we have two colleagues, Jocelyn Nieva and Rebecca Vernon, who will help us to navigate the tool that you received a few days ago that will help all of us to assess the legal environment for civil society organizations in our own countries and contexts. So we are very happy to have you all here today. This session will provide also illustrative examples of how philanthropy support organizations have been involved in efforts to address problems in the legal environment. And we really hope to have a very active session. You are very welcome to ask questions, to share your doubts, and also your feedback on this tool that um, it's being finalized. I want also to put something on your radar, and it's that a few weeks ago, Wings launched an impact case studies publication, which illustrates how PSOs are promoting an enabling environment for philanthropy and civil society. We will share the link with you on the chat box, and we will also love to hear your feedback on this publication. So once again, thank you very much, and I will leave you with Rebecca and Jocelyn for the session today.
Hi, everybody.
Good morning.
I hope you can see us okay. I'm Rebecca. I'm here with Jocelyn. We are from the International Center of Not-for-Profit Law, and we are excited to be here with you. I think since it's not a huge group, can I ask if people can introduce themselves?
You have to give them some guidance on how, perhaps if you're from Latin America, could you introduce yourselves to the group?
So we will need like 2 minutes to do that because we would need to make each participant panelist. So be eyes on that, and we will allow each person to unmute themselves. So we have a few names from Latin America that I can quickly identify. We have Mariana Sandoval, we have Ixanar, and I think that you are all being able to unmute yourself, so you're very welcome to introduce to the rest of the participants in the webinar.
If this is too complicated, then perhaps folks could say hello in the chat box. We don't want to make this a logistical challenge. We just wanted to give people a chance to say hello.
Everyone is now a panelist, so I encourage the people that are hearing us to unmute themselves and to share their names and organizations and what you think is relevant for this session.
Hi, here is Mariana Sandoval. I'm the Executive Director Comunalia, the network of community foundations in Mexico.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else from Latin America that would like to introduce themselves?
Hi, I'm also from Mexico. I am Ixana Ruriza. I'm in Guadalajara. I'm also from Comunalia. I'm in the western part of Mexico. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. Welcome.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah.
we can.
Hi, I'm Chupa Piri. I'm from Zambia. I'm the Chief Executive of the Turkana Community Foundation. My connectivity is really bad, so I'll probably unmute myself so that I can concentrate and save any connectivity that I do have.
Thanks.
Great. Thanks. It's great to hear from you.
Anybody else from Africa? Maybe we can move on to Asia?
Anybody up late at night in Asia?
Or early? Okay, how about Europe?
Hello.
Yes, hi.
This is Pilar Cervera from Spain. I'm a part of the law issues and representation from the Spanish Foundation Association. Well, hello everyone.
Hi, thank you for joining us.
Anyone else?
Anyone?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Sarah Hennon. I'm the development manager with FORWARD, the International Network of NGO Platforms, and I'm calling in from Paris today.
Hi, this is Boris speaking.
Hi, Boris.
Hi, I'm calling from Bratislava, Slovakia. I'm from the Center for Philanthropy, a philanthropy support organization in Slovakia, operating also in Central Europe.
Thank you, Boris. Great to hear from you again.
Hi, sorry, it's one from Asia. I didn't unmute myself. My name is Izon Storos. I'm from Indonesia, from the Indonesia Philanthropy Association. I will be here only for half an hour because I have another call later, so sorry. Yeah.
That's fine. We're glad you can join us.
Thank you.
Is there anybody else we're missing?
Well, this is a great, diverse organization, collection of organizations, and I think we should just dive in. Thanks so much for giving a sense of who's on the line.
Yeah, we really appreciate it. So I guess we'll start with just sort of reviewing where we are in this project. So this is part of a project with WINGS and ICNL. This is the second and final webinar. We had the first webinar last month where we focused on the legal issues that often face CSOs that impede their work. We talked about things like burdensome, difficult, or vague requirements for registration, restrictions on activities that CSOs could undertake, intrusive oversight, barriers to receiving funds, so a full range of things that CSOs face in the legal environment that imposes those restrictions. We also talked a little bit about some examples of efforts to overcome those restrictions and some of the keys to success. And then we started a little bit to talk about what some considerations for CSOs would be, or for philanthropy or organizations to address the legal restrictions that impact your work and also the work of the organizations that you're often partnering with. So the next step was to develop a tool that really teased out a lot of those considerations, that went a little bit deeper to help organizations think strategically through the different considerations for engagement. And so we sent that tool around last week, I believe. I'm hopeful you've had a chance to look at it, but if not, we're going to go through it today. That's what we're going to focus this webinar on, is hopefully using some of your examples of issues you've seen to talk about how this tool can be used to really help you make sure you're considering the different aspects of engagement to promote a more legal enabling environment and address some of the restrictions you're seeing in your countries or with the organizations you're working with, and to think through it very strategically to make a decision on when engagement might be most helpful. So I guess first I want to ask if people have had the chance to look at the tool yet. And if you have any questions that have come up as you've looked at it. I want to make sure that if there's any questions you have that we're answering them throughout today's webinar. All right. So as you've probably seen, the tool consists of 4 separate documents. The first one is just instructions on how to use it, and then 3 different tables you fill out. And these tables are intended to be filled out individually and then looked at holistically. Great. So, and you want to look at them all together to make sure you're not inadvertently overlooking some issue or some consideration. So part one of the tool, as you can see, I think I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to turn off my video and share my screen so you all can see what I'm looking at. All right, so you can see this is part one of the tool. So this is really an overview where you're gathering a lot of different types of information. I want to make a couple notes. First of all, the tool that you've received and the one that we're looking at here is not in final form. We're going to make some edits based on any feedback we receive from you all today. So it would be really helpful if you can help provide us with any feedback that can help really make this as useful as possible. And we'll share the final version. And that's what Wings will post on their website. So it'll be available for you and anybody else who wants to access it. So this part one is having you fill out a bunch of different information, but keeping it organized. And we have, like, in the top corner, you can see that you can pick what the overall area that the issue you're dealing with comes under. We included this for a couple reasons. First of all, it helps you keep things organized. If you're filling out this tool for multiple issues that you're seeing, you can say, okay, like, here's all the issues for registration, and look at those together and look at them holistically. It also, I think, is helpful because some of the resources we cite to about the best practices and standards for laws governing civil society are organized, by registration or government oversight or funding or tax. So it will help you sort of figure out where in the resources that we have you can look to find the information you need on what the standard is and what the best practice is for these different issues. So you're filling out a lot of different types of information in this first tool. And you're going to use the information that you fill out here and sort of your starting point in the next two charts. So describing the issue, asking whether the issue is caused by the text of a law or in the way the law is implemented. That will help you figure out in the second part how long and how complex your response needs to be. If it's an issue with implementation, often the issue can be accomplished by better training or better protocols for government officials. If it's an issue with the text of the law, then it's a longer process to actually engage in legal reform. Describing the impact, that's what the impact is, who it's affecting, and how severe the impact is. And that can help you figure out what might need to be addressed first. Asking how does this issue affect philanthropy organizations? So how does it affect your organization?
Hi, Rebecca. I think that we missed you for a while, the last 30 seconds.
Oh. So let me step back and make sure you've heard that we're going to go through this tool in more detail with your specific issues, but I wanted to give you a quick run through it quickly, talk about a few examples of how civil society or how philanthropy organizations have engaged, and then dive into examples of how to use this tool. So you can see there's things like who is interested or invested in addressing this issue. You'll use that information in part 3 primarily, and then some questions that help you understand the greater context of how this issue is taking place and how it might be related to other things. One is if this issue is linked to other types of repression in the overall environment. So is it otherwise a pretty enabling environment for civic freedoms, or is it a more restrictive environment? And that might inform who you can engage with and how you can engage. Have there been previous efforts to address this? If so, what happened? Has anything changed since then? And then this final line was not on the tool that we emailed out last week. It got cut off when we converted it to PDF, but it'll be on the final version. That is, are there any particular features of the local and national environment to consider? Is there anything else we're not capturing here? Are there vulnerable groups that could be further impacted by this? Are there elections coming up that might mean that it would be harder to engage? Are there certain sort of hot or sensitive issues going on that you might want to be aware of that could impact how you use this tool? Moving on to part 2, here you're going to think a little bit more about what might be priorities. And then put, an issue that you've identified somewhere on this chart. It's kind of a graph. So there's short-term, medium-term, and long-term, and then low priority, medium priority, and high priority. So it might be an issue that that is really high priority, that's really severely impacting the operation of civil society, but it might require actually reforming the law, which would mean it's a much longer-term solution. So you'd put it in the top right corner. I want to stress that just because something falls under low priority, it's not having a huge impact on civil society, doesn't mean that you shouldn't pay attention to it or that it can only be addressed after other things are addressed. There might be a really good reason to start with a lower priority issue. For instance, you might want to work with some government entities to address high priority long-term issues, but you might not have strong relationships with those government entities yet. And so it might be easier to get started with maybe something that's less sensitive, lower priority, not having as much of an impact, to help build those relationships so that when it's time, when you're ready to address a higher priority, longer term issue, you have those government entities, you have their trust, and they understand that you're really good colleagues. So there can be really good reasons for addressing lower priority issues. The third part is looking at who you're going to be working with to address these issues. This can help you identify any gaps in who you might want to build relationships with, or any gaps in information that you might need to ensure that the people or entities you've identified are really good advocates with you. So that, if you need to, develop more data to convince a government entity that this is a problem or the impact of the problem, you can look and say, okay, I need resources that I need. I need to develop, gather anecdotes from civil society organizations to convince this person that this is really an issue. And one thing that I want to stress is that because philanthropy organizations, issues might affect them a little bit differently than it affects other types of civil society organizations, you want to it's really important to make sure you're understanding who your allies are and who this issue addresses sort of from top to bottom. And that will help you ensure that you're not accidentally causing more harm, doing more harm than good. This can happen when efforts to change a law don't take into account how the law impacts different types of groups, and the law that could be passed could actually be worse for some groups than the law that's in place. Or if you're conducting an advocacy campaign that's drawing a lot of attention to an issue, that might put a spotlight on issues being faced by groups that represent vulnerable populations. And it's possible that those groups, they're facing some problems, but they've been able to navigate them. And they might not want, a further spotlight placed on them if they're working on sensitive issues or representing groups that might be targets of negative behavior. So I guess before we move on, can we pause and see if there are any questions at this point?
This is Nadia, and I think that's something that I would like to talk a little bit more about. It's each of the categories that you have on top, that you walk like very fast, but maybe to understand what are you referring to for each of those categories that start with registration and or like taxes and other things. I think that it will be good to understand what we're talking about when we talk about each of these categories.
Yeah, so when we talk about registration and things like that?
So this is Jocelyn. I just want to clarify that Rebecca just did a very, very quick run through of the 3 tools just to refresh folks' memory in case they reviewed it a few days ago. But we're going to be going over the tool in greater detail, providing through a discussion that actually applies concrete legal issues to the tool. So this was just in the interest of providing an overview, but Nadia, we will definitely go over the categories in more detail.
Great, thank you.
Do we have any other questions?
For the participants, we remind you that you just need to unmute yourself and you will be able to talk to the rest of the group.
This is Sarah. I was wondering if you've tested out the tool in practice yet, if you have examples of use and what the feedback has been from that. Thanks.
Hi, Sarah. Yeah, we have not tested this out yet. This is new.
Okay, great.
We're hoping that we can talk through some of the issues you're facing and figure out how it's useful, if it needs to make any changes, and then we develop this 4 wings, and it'll be made broadly available to membership. And we're happy to answer questions if people go through it.
Okay, great. Thanks for that.
Okay, great. I want to encourage people. I know there's a lot of information here, and so I want to make sure that people, if you have questions throughout, please, don't be shy. Make sure you unmute yourself, and please ask questions throughout. If something is unclear, we're happy to answer any questions or make sure that we want to make sure this is making sense and is useful and that we haven't overlooked something. So before we go further into the tool, I want to give a couple of examples of ways in which philanthropy organizations have been involved in efforts to promote a more enabling environment for civil society, and what particular sort of considerations and strengths made those efforts successful.
Sorry, this is Jocelyn. I'm just going to add that Rebecca's going to share a few comments, and we hope, or a few examples, and we hope that these examples trigger for you thoughts about successful experiences that you have had, or conversely, frustrating experiences that you have had where you as philanthropy organizations aimed to contribute to legal reform initiatives. We know many of you have done this, and so we really want this to be a participatory session. As Rebecca speaks, please think about experiences that you've had that you think the others could learn from.
Yeah. So I want to talk first about an experience in Kenya. If there's anybody on here who's familiar with this experience and what I'm about to talk about, please, happy to have your contributions as well. I want to make sure that if we have local knowledge about these types of things, that we're including it. So there was a group of philanthropy organizations that was headed by the East African Association for Grantmakers that led a campaign to improve the Income Tax Act to provide more incentive for contributions to charitable organizations. So this would enable both philanthropy organizations private businesses, individuals to give to charitable organizations with better income tax benefits. The group had met with some other grant makers from around East Africa, and then met, individually as their country team, and decided that this is an issue that was important to them, that was affecting their work, but that was also affecting the work, or that was affecting, what individuals or other private organizations were able to give, which in turn also had a really big impact on charitable organizations more broadly, because if there were more incentives for giving funding to these organizations, then the organizations would be able to attract more funding and have more financial stability, and wouldn't be so reliant on foreign sources of funding if there was a better domestic tax incentive for funding for charitable organizations. So this East African Association of Grantmakers mobilized other organizations, which included other CSOs that weren't philanthropy organizations. They also included a range of faith-based organizations, a group of accountants, and corporate accountability bodies. So you can see in the group of entities that they brought together, they weren't just looking at CSOs. They were also looking at accountants who have for tax issues, and accountants can be really valuable allies who understand how things can work. Or they also brought together a corporate accountability body that would help understand what private entities could bring to this conversation. So they thought really creatively about who their allies would be in this effort. And we'd encourage you, as you're going through this tool and filling out part 3, especially about different allies, to think really creatively, just as they had in this situation. So the group developed a memorandum and had a series of meetings with the relevant government ministry and regulatory authorities to present the government with their proposal for incentives within the framework of the Income Tax Act. In the end, the Ministry of Finance, after these meetings and receiving the proposal, the memorandum that explained what this coalition thought would be most effective to improve grant making to local civil society organizations through tax incentives, the ministry ended up largely adopting their proposal to provide these incentives for charitable giving. So it was a really successful campaign that was followed from lots of meetings and having a really strong written document with a clear proposal and a clear idea of what was needed. So the philanthropy organization, this East African grant-making group, was able to, some of the reasons they were really effective was that they played a convening role. They brought together a diverse group of stakeholders to work together as an advocacy campaign. And they were especially able to bridge the gap between civil society and the government sector, which the relationship between civil society and the government can be antagonistic at times. And so having philanthropy organizations that were not sort of non-political, did not have this potentially antagonistic relationship, they were able to play this role to mobilize as one team. And then some leaders of philanthropy organizations had connections with government officials. So there were, of course, the official meetings with ministry and regulators. But at the same time, those people in the philanthropy organizations who knew some people in the government socially, might see them outside of these official meetings, were sort of talking to the relevant decision makers behind the scenes. So that was a way that they were able to bring together their resources. Do we have a question? Okay. And then another example I wanted to talk about was in Tajikistan. The Open Society Institute in Tajikistan over the last year and a half has led an effort to include CSOs as a subject of social entrepreneurship, which would enable income tax benefits for CSOs when they conduct entrepreneurial activities. So basically this means that CSOs, if they're conducting different types of activities that would that are considered entrepreneurial, they could still get tax benefits. So the Ministry of Justice asked for a comprehensive analysis of the need for a separate legal regulation of social entrepreneurship. So the Ministry of Justice was like, okay, well, we want to know if we're going to pass this or pass more regulations, what is the need for it? We need to have some data and information behind it. And in response to that, the local OSI office in Tajikistan led a working group of both state representatives and CSOs to draft a background analysis and an initial concept. So they brought together state and CSO actors to conduct the first analysis and the background information. And then once they finished this, they held a roundtable that provided the preliminary results of their analysis. And the roundtable included government agencies, parliamentarians, civil society organizations, and the media. And that enabled all these different entities to provide feedback onto the analysis, that they had developed to date, to further inform it, to make sure that they could present to the ministry a really complete view of what the need was for these new regulations on social entrepreneurship. Here we can see that OSI provided some particular strengths. Technical capacity to gather and analyze data from a variety of sources. As an organization with a broader reach, they could gather data from a lot of different sources and bring it together and analyze it as one. A lot of grassroots organizations or smaller organizations that might be affected by these regulations may not have the capacity to bring together data from a lot of different sources. So that's a really valuable ability that OSI had. They have strong media outreach and communication skills, which brought media into this roundtable and drew attention to it, the work they were doing and why this was important. They were able to present their analysis to the media and get greater distribution of the work they were doing. They also have the financial and legal stability necessary to lead a longer-term reform initiative. Again, they've been working on this for more than a year. And so they have enough steady stream of funding to keep working on this over the longer term. And they also have relationships with members of the international community that adds just some initial stability. When we look at part 2 of this tool, an issue like tax benefits for social entrepreneurship might not be something that has a massive impact on the sector. It might be sort of in that lower row where it's things that are lower impact, but it's still something where OSI saw that there was a need, that this would help promote financial stability of civil society organizations in their country, and that they could use the tools and the skills that they had to make an impact here, to give the government the information they needed to make a change that would impact the sector, that could help organizations with their funding challenges. So that's something to keep in mind, as I said, that just because something seems like relatively low impact or low priority compared to other things, it's not like this means that organizations can't function at all, they're being shut down, but it still is something that can be really important for organizations, and that philanthropy organizations can have a pretty big impact in these types of areas as well. Has anybody else had any other similar experiences to these? Was there any back and forth or trade-offs you made? Are there other examples that people can share?
Folks, we're pretty confident that you've had some examples. They may be positive, they may be frustrating, but I bet you could come up with some examples. Think about what were the qualities of your engagement? What did you bring to the table? And were you ultimately successful, or have you been able to reflect and identify where you might have adapted your strategies and brought in and proceeded with your advocacy in a different way?
I don't know how relevant this experience is, but we were working
Well,
with.
yeah, we're listening.
Okay, so I was saying about the time frames, because we have very short terms for lawmakers in state level, the subnational
Yes.
level. They only have 3 years. So sometimes they're working on a project and they leave for either for their campaigns or for their term is over, and you have to start over.
You know, that's a really that's one of the challenges of working in advocacy. Do you have any approach? You know, can you tell us what worked, what didn't work?
What worked was starting over, and actually we had to switch parties. We had someone supporting from one party, and in the next term, it was from a different party. And in the end, it was the kind of the opposite in terms of political position.
Right. Yeah. This issue of elections is part of the context that we're encouraging users of the tool to reflect on. It's the last question on part one. The whole context of elections and partisan outreach is one that's really important to keep in mind for a couple of reasons. One is, if you wait until right before the election, the oxygen in the room, or the whole attention, the ability to capture the attention of legislators and the public can be very challenging, because people are focused on something else. However, conversely, elections can be a fertile context if you approach it early enough. Elections can be a fertile context because parties are interested in reaching out and gaining alliances. And if you can strategically, for example, have meetings, this happened in Honduras right after the coup, when there was a return to democracy. The civil society coalitions in Honduras worked together to interview all of the major factions in the legislature about their position on a new legal framework for civil society. And they approached it in a nonpartisan way. They reached out to all of the parties. They used it as an opportunity to educate the different parties and to have that platform for dialogue on an equal footing with all of the parties. It was extremely useful as an opportunity to obtain commitments from the different factions on the draft law. So in summary, elections can be very fertile ground if you approach it in a nonpartisan, early way, as an opportunity to raise awareness and as an opportunity for dialogue. If you wait too late, elections can be disruptive to your advocacy campaign because there's no space for attention to your issue. As I hope that helps. Any other questions, or if you'd like a follow-up, please. Well, maybe
we can move on. All right. So I think we can dive into the tool. I want to turn this over to you all and ask, what issues are you all facing in your countries? What are the legal issues or the challenges that your organizations are facing, or the civil society organizations you work with are facing, that you think you'd like to begin to address?
We frequently see barriers to entry, what we call barriers to entry, related to registration, where the requirements are extremely ambiguous, they're highly discretionary, where there are long delays in processing applications, where regulators arbitrarily deny requests for registration, where certain groups such as LGBT or environmental rights groups or perceived opposition groups are denied an opportunity to register in a timely manner. The registration applications are delayed or they're denied. Is that an issue in any of your countries?
Yes, actually here in Mexico, we are working in a local law for the state of Nuevo León. And one challenge that we are facing is that to register this proposal, we need the signatures of at least 100 NGOs. And they are just not interested in this topic. So we have organized meetings to present the law, to explain them that this is very important, but they just don't care. So we don't know how to approach them to get this requirement that is very basic to go to the next step.
That's a fascinating example. Can I just ask, is the law that you're talking about a promotion law, a ley de fomento for the state?
Of Nuevo León, yes.
Okay, so it's a ley de fomento. Okay,
yes.
So very briefly, just for the others, if I can summarize, that law is a law that enables not-for-profit organizations to register and obtain a tax status, a CLUNY, an identification number, and it enables them to participate in state-funded activities. In other words, by registering under this law, they're eligible to receive public funding. Correct?
Yes, and also we are introducing these innovative, how do you say, topics as entrepreneurial activities, also to recognize the activities of the networks, of the grassroots organizations. But yes, in general, it's about that.
So in summary, the benefit of the law is greater visibility, greater legitimacy, greater access to funding from both public and private sources through entrepreneurial activities, plus tax benefits. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
And that's the way you're packaging it, and yet you're still not receiving the response that you wanted.
Exactly.
Okay, that's a great example. Let's hang on to that, and that can be one of the examples that we'll use to fill in the chart. Okay? Is there another example? Does anybody else want to add an example? And maybe it could be a completely different, let's pull down it could be a completely different issue, restrictions on engagement in policy making, limitations on access to foreign funding, or intrusive government regulation, intrusive government oversight. Is anybody else having a different issue that we could be addressing? And I think it would be really helpful to have two different examples. Because we have a few in our back pocket that we could use. We have a few that we've prepared, but it would be great if we have one of yours.
Hi there.
Hi.
Hi.
Yeah, I actually passed my example down, and that's around registration for CSOs in Zambia.
Sorry, can you say that again, please?
I had typed my question out initially. I guess you
Let me see.
able to see it.
Yeah, the problem is when I'm sharing my screen, I can't see what people are typing. So
No worries. So what I put down was the fact that there's mandatory registration for CSOs in Zambia. And alongside that, there are undefined sort of refusal is undefined, and so it's very ambiguous for us.
right.
And then the other point that I think is really quite sort of unsettling is the fact that you have to re-register every 3 years.
Yeah.
So you've got registration is both mandatory and re-registration is frequent.
Yeah.
Okay, and then each of these phases is so discretionary that it probably flows into the next, that you're in a constant state of limbo. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's absolutely right.
Yeah, and that's a situation that's very familiar. We've seen that in particular in Ecuador and in Bolivia. Both countries passed really restrictive and really ambiguous laws in 2013 that required re-registration, but as a tactic, the government kept many organizations in this legal limbo where they could not register, they could not get this required registration, and as a result, it was extremely difficult to carry out operations because they could not demonstrate to banks or to foreign funders or to other government agencies that they had satisfied the requirements. Does that sound familiar?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So basically, we have two examples here. We have one example where the government is essentially hostile to organizations from civil society, and then we have another example where in the state of Nuevo León, it's not necessarily a situation at all of hostility. It's a situation where an initiative is coming from the civil society sector to fill a gap in legislation that the government has left. So it's not a situation of hostility at all. So that's two that you could describe that as, maybe the government is not, it's open to collaboration. The government's open to collaboration. I mean, are you in Nuevo León? Are you experiencing pushback from the government?
We haven't even contacted them.
Oh,
we are
okay.
still preparing everything. Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's. Do you anticipate that the government would object if you have an initiative for?
No, we cannot present the proposal until we get the 100 signatures.
Okay.
And we don't have it.
That's a really great opportunity to talk about the importance of alliances.
Mm-hmm.
We had thought about adding another topic, which is indifference. When the government, it just doesn't care one way or the other for civil society participation. And we thought that might be a good context to talk about another set of legal restrictions, which are FATF, the Financial Action Task Force requirements that are affecting access to financial services. Let's deal with the two that we have on the table, because I'm looking at the clock and we have 40 minutes left. Let's look at those two and use those two examples. You have one which is a challenge that's arising from the sector itself, and you have another where you have a essentially hostile environment. What do you think, Rebecca?
Let's dive in with the hostile environment first, and we'll show how part 1 works with that issue. And then I think that the one where you're dealing with trying to find alliances in the sector is a good way to talk about part 3. And then we can sort of then circle back to part 2, talking about the example we have of the government being indifferent, as well as these other 2 examples, and see how we can map multiple issues on the same form in part 2 and show how that can be really helpful.
Excellent. And
Yeah.
that's great.
Okay. Great. So we're going to start with the situation in Zambia. So at the top, you would describe what the issue is. So we've said that there's the registration requirements are vague, that there's mandatory registration, and that there's re-registration. And all of this leads to organizations being in legal limbo. I think, let me know if I've missed anything. I think that's mostly captured what the crux of the issue is. So then the next one, is the root of this issue in the text of the law or in the way the law is implemented? So is it the text of what the law is saying that has all these requirements, or the way the law is implemented? Tupa, do you have or it could be both. And it sounds like in this situation, it's probably the text of the law that requires these things.
Yeah, it's probably both.
Probably both. And then also the government, because the registration, we see this a lot, when the registration requirements are vague, the government is able to implement the law in a way that has a really negative impact. So
Yeah.
it's both the text of the law and implementation. So you're dealing with a couple different issues here that together make a really challenging situation. As we discussed a moment ago, the impact of this is that basically organizations aren't able to operate. They're not able to show that they have the required documentation to open bank accounts. They can't get authorization to undertake activities. So the impact, and you would want to go, I'm doing this very quickly here, but you'd want to be.
This is something that takes time because the impact is going to be different for different types of organizations. If you are, and this is very significant, particularly for philanthropy organizations. If there's what we call a barrier to entry, it's a problem to get legal recognition. There is often a sense that, well, I'm in, so I'm not going to worry about the problems that are affecting other organizations that might be new. So the impact might not be so severe on the more established, the more highly regarded, the more mainstream, the less controversial organizations. The impact is probably most severe on the resource poor, brand new grassroots organizations in the interior of the country where the costs of that initial back and forth bureaucratic effort to obtain legal recognition is going to be high. So you have to understand that the impact might be very different on different organizations, and it may be for some philanthropy organizations that you are supporting, you know, the long established, highly regarded charities of your country more than, and you may not be in touch with the organizations. So when you describe, but we don't need to do this now. We're not going to have the time to fill in.
Jocelyn, so sorry, but we're hearing you a little bit far from the microphone, so we're not getting the entire thing that you're saying.
Is this better?
It is.
Better? Can you hear me now?
We can.
Okay, so I'll just, in a nutshell. The bottom, we are not going to be able to fill in every line of these charts now, but the bottom line is that the severity of the impact and the nature of the impact of a law may vary within a country, and the most severe impact may fall on organizations that are outside of the networks of the philanthropy organizations. And that's why fact-finding is so important.
Yeah. And this next question gets to that as well. So it asks how the issue impacts philanthropy organizations and how it impacts different types of CSOs. And when we say different types of CSOs, we don't just mean non-philanthropy organization CSOs. We mean, as Jocelyn said, grassroots CSOs outside the capital region. We mean CSOs that work on different types of issues, sensitive issues, not sensitive issues. Making sure you understand sort of the full global experience of different types of organizations when it comes to this issue. The next thing we'll look at is who is interested or invested in addressing this issue. Tuba, have you talked to any other organizations in Zambia about who, either other CSOs or any other types of entities, any government entities? If there's re-registration requirements, that can actually be burdensome for the government entity that has to approve registrations because they end up with big backlogs of paperwork to deal with. So there can be a variety of different entities that are interested or invested in addressing the issue. Have you thought through that at all? And if not, we can think through it a little bit together.
No, I haven't, not as yet. But I've actually just arrived in Zambia, and I'm doing some research around the legal environment. And so I will have all that information imminently.
That's great, because there is a whole universe of other actors, and it's going to come up over and over again in these charts. There's a universe of other actors that are often overlooked, right? If you're talking about re-registration, if you're talking about interruption of services because organizations cannot continue to engage in the way with their programmatic activities, right? You have an organization that's doing healthcare in rural regions, and their paperwork is caught up in a bureaucratic agency in the capital city, and they find that their programs are interrupted. Okay, this is a frequent consequence of a re-registration requirement. Think through who might have an interest, who might notice this kind of interruption. Well, the most important ones are the beneficiaries. What about the people who had services that they were counting on interrupted? Local governments might be very interested in that issue. They know that the public health service might not be able to fill that gap, and they're very concerned with ensuring that services are delivered. Think about the service providers, those who are contracted by the program, the doctors, the health agents that go out into the field. Think about the hospitals that are dealing with spikes in illnesses. So in other words, be very creative in thinking about who's affected. The international cooperation agencies, neighboring, it might not work, but neighboring both jurisdictions inside the country and outside the country that have an interest. So be very creative in thinking about who might be interested. Local universities.
The legislators, the national parliamentarians that come from that region or regions that are really impacted could also be really invested in that because they, their constituents aren't receiving the services they're used to.
Yeah. So that's what this column is looking for you to do. Think broadly about who else has an interest in the issue.
Yeah. As I said, these last three are looking at sort of the broader context. So, are there, is there generally concern? Is the government generally not friendly towards civic freedoms. We will give you some resources for where you can find out that information. You probably already know, but you can get some specifics from different resources. Because that can help you understand whether you're dealing with, whether there's sort of a bigger issue that this is a part of, and that can affect your advocacy strategy. You might not, if civic freedoms are a larger issue, you might not want to approach it as a civic freedoms or human rights issue. You might want to approach it as, services for affected populations issue. Based on, I know you've just gotten to Zambia, but do you have a sense of how this might be linked to other political issues in the country or other types of repression?
It's completely linked to kind of political oppression. Yeah, definitely. That's the basis of it, to be honest.
Well, when you have that kind of circumstance, it's really important to step back and look and see how is this issue affecting the sector, the civil society sector, and the nation as a whole, because it may be that by you narrow your options too much if you just focus on the expected targets of repression, and you miss the broader impact. And I'll give you an example from Ecuador, where there was a new law that was implemented. It was implemented in an extraordinarily discretionary way. It created this re-registration requirement that you're talking about, and it was used in a couple of high-profile cases to either threaten to shut down or to actually shut down highly visible human rights defenders and environmental rights defenders. And the attention of human rights defenders and the attention of the international community was focused on those high-profile cases that were in reality 3 to 5, right? And by doing that, by focusing the attention so closely on these high-profile cases, they missed the forest. They missed the forest for the trees. And the forest was that hundreds and hundreds of civil society organizations all over the country were shutting down, hundreds of them, because they could not meet these new requirements, because they did not understand the new requirements, because compliance with the new requirements was so complex and costly that the organization simply gave up, and they voluntarily dissolved. So my point here is that your advocacy strategy, your mapping, your understanding of the context is going to be completely different if you focus on the 5 high-profile cases or if you focus on the hundreds and hundreds of cases. And it may be much more likely that you will find a receptive audience and you will increase your likelihood of advocating for enabling reforms if you focus on the big picture and not on those high-profile cases.
Great. It's a really good example. And then one thing to know is if there have been previous efforts to address the issue. If other types of civil society organizations or impacted populations have ever taken this up before, what happened? If the issue is still ongoing, they might not have been entirely successful. They might have tackled a piece of it, but not all of it. So what did they do? Has anything changed? And because that can help you understand to make sure you're not just repeating something that's been tried before that wasn't successful. And again, talking to a wide variety of different types of organizations can help you know whether that's happened. And then this final one, as I mentioned previously, is asking, are there elections coming up? Are there really sensitive political issues that you want to make sure you're not stepping on, that you're not getting accidentally having, because that can derail your whole advocacy strategy. Or asking if there are certain types of groups that might be particularly impacted by this, that you don't want to, again, do more harm than good. So in the interest of time, I think we'll jump to part 3, and we'll talk about what's going on in Mexico and what your different, who your potential allies might be. So can we ask Mariana, what types of organizations? Oh, I'm sorry. Who was the one who? Do I have? Was it?
It doesn't.
Anyway, whoever from Mexico is.
It was ICNL.
Oh, sorry, ICNL. Can I ask you to talk about who you've reached out to so far as your potential allies to get organizations to sign this, to sign on to this?
I think I'd have rather Mariana talk about it because it's in her state and I'm in a different state. So
Yes.
Okay.
Well, actually, now who is leading this effort is Consejo Cívico, which is a local network of NGOs. So the first allies that they are asking or inviting to these presentations of the law is the NGOs that are part of this network. And also they are working with Appleseed, which is a network of pro bono support, or legal support, pro bono legal support for CSO.
Okay.
But they are who are leading the strategy.
Okay.
Yeah.
So are there any other potential allies that you can think of? Like who else would you fill out on this list?
Well, right now they are analyzing which of the parties or even at the individual level of legislators could be allies for this strategy.
Great.
Yeah, and what else? And also I think they have reached the foundations from corporations.
So foundations and then corporations. You can go on to a second page of this.
Yeah.
So this Consejo Cívico, so it sounds like if they're a local network of CSOs, they probably have a lot of power to influence the actors that you need. So it might be.
Is that the case?
Yes. Actually, they also do a lot of strengthening to the sector, but we are living in Mexico, a very hostile federal political environment. So the CSOs are afraid to sign anything that has to do with law or with government because they fear they're gonna be in some bad list, or I don't know how to explain it.
Yeah,
That's really great, and everything that you just described would fit on the final column of the part 1 chart. So this is how they go together.
Yeah. So it sounds like Consejo Cívico might be interested, but they might be having trouble getting the CSOs that they work with to get engaged. Am I understanding the situation?
Yes.
Okay, great. So you could put in this column, that the umbrella organization is interested, but local CSOs are less interested. And then you would ask, how much knowledge does Consejo Civico and the local CSOs they work with have of the situation?
Well, I think Consejo Cívico has very clear why this is important and why they are doing this, but I think they haven't communicated well or expressed in a good way why this is important to the CSOs in general. I think the communication strategy has failed.
So then you'd ask kind of what actions could you do to increase, the interest of the local CSOs or their knowledge? Because it sounds like Consejo Civico, you're happy with their level of interest and knowledge, but what you really want to focus on is what you could do to increase the interest or knowledge of local organizations.
Yes. I don't know, maybe to make do a step backwards and explain why although in general it's important,
Yeah.
Because I think sometimes we go to the specifics and we don't understand the general context, and maybe that's what is lost here.
Yeah, that's a really important point. What is the value of, break it down, go back to the beginning, what you just said. Break it down. But also, you might consider, for example, bringing in or contacting.
Jocelyn, we're not hearing you very well.
Sorry. You might want to consider bringing in representatives of civil society organizations from other Mexican states that have similar laws that explain at a personal level, at an impactful level, what difference it makes for their organizations to have a good law and how it improves services. Bring in a couple of beneficiaries of those organizations. Invite them to speak. It might be by phone or just getting a letter or by video to explain at a real personal level. My organization was reaching X number of young people. We passed a law on social entrepreneurship, and as a result, these 15 young people now have jobs, and these other 5 learned a trade and have now opened their own stores, or something like that. And that's the kind of personal story that touches the conscience of your members because they can relate to it. And it's the kind of personal stories that can touch the hearts of legislators.
Yeah.
So those,
yeah.
That's sort of the type of resources you might need for advocacy. You probably also already have available knowledge of, you already know generally why the work is important. You're able to make a broader explanation with your current knowledge of why the work is important. So you can put that in, what you already have available is your knowledge of the context. But, it might be helpful to have personal stories.
Yeah. Another resource available for advocacy, this is where you have to dig deep and think about what you bring to the table. You have a network. It exists. You have a way to reach out to your members. They join forces. They have a wealth of knowledge about what they're doing and how it might be improved. Surveys. If this law was passed, how could it affect you? But you have to be very, very concrete. Pass out the survey. We have seen, for example, go through all of the benefits that the proposed law would include, right? Write them all down. How, the law would allow civil society organizations to do X. Would that how could that make a difference for your organization? This is both an information gathering tool and also an educational tool, because when your members read this and they see gee, this is what the law was intended to do and I could benefit from it, then the survey it gives you an opportunity to recruit support.
Yeah. So, one of the things that these different tools are asking you to do is think really critically and strategically. For some of these different, fields to fill out, you might know the answer off the top of your head. But our hope in creating this is that this is making you think really critically about a lot of different things that you might not know off the top of your head. And I know that we've just ask you right now to think of things off the top of your head. And so then based on this, you would sort of assess, so do we have a really strong opportunity here? And I think that you can say for this row, I think this is a really strong opportunity.
What do you think?
Yeah, do you
yeah. Strong opportunity?
Yeah, no, definitely.
Yeah.
Well, because the thing, what you have in your favor is that many Mexican states have these laws, right?
Yes.
It might not match the law that you're proposing, but this is not a high aim necessarily. And
yes.
One of the things that you have in your advantages is you're able to point to what a difference it's made in other states. So anyway, it might be difficult. We're not saying it's difficult. We're just saying that it may be a very strong opportunity, and it's encouraging to hear that you agree.
Yeah, it is. Thank you.
Great. So now I'm going to jump, in the interest of time, I'm going to jump to part 2, which is sort of this checkerboard that we have to fill out where we think something might lie. So let's go back to our example from Zambia. We have at the top short-term, medium-term, and long-term. This is sort of how long and complex the process will be to make the change you need. So for short-term things, they can be addressed relatively quickly, for example, through education and dialogue. On the other end of the spectrum is long-term things that can require a lot of time and complex resources, such as changes to the legal framework. So for Zambia, where would you say that the issue falls along this spectrum at the top?
And let's just be clear that you can break an issue down, right? You don't have to, you can break it into sub-issues, and that might help you strategically to determine how to work.
Right. So it sounds like with the registration issue, there's actually, as we identified in part 1, there's actually several different issues under registration. Vague requirements, mandatory registration, re-registration. So those can all be different issues that you could break down.
Yeah, that makes sense, because I think the issue of the need to re-register, that's probably a long-term one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And actually, I'd also add the ambiguity around the grounds for refusal. Mm-hmm. Actually, that could be more medium-term, because it's pardon?
No, go ahead.
Yeah, because I was just thinking it could be as easy, well, not as easy, but it could be as simple as putting down the grounds for refusal, or just being clear of what the potential grounds could be, as opposed to sort of leaving it to the decision of the NGO board that is made up of the government's representatives of the government. So I think a little bit more specificity in it, which would be more medium term, I'd imagine.
I think you're absolutely right, and I think that you nailed it. Where you could say that the re-registration would maybe a longer haul, but in the short term, you could engage in activities to clarify for civil society organizations. It may be a long-term activity to have a change in the law So the changing the law and re-registration, for example, that might take a long time. In the medium term, it might be feasible if you have a good strategy to convince the government that it is in their interest to provide guidance, and that you would work with the government to provide guidance so that organizations could understand how regulators make their determinations, right? So you could, you might be able to have a powerful message if you told regulators, we know that you are underfunded. We know that you don't have very many professionals and that you have so much work to do. We want to help it be easier for you to do that work. Let's work together on guidelines. And that might be something that you could accomplish in the medium term. And in the short term, there are things that you can do as well. We're clear this is a high priority problem. Are there things that the sector itself can do? For example, produce guidebooks for internal use, provide capacity building, provide pro bono legal assistance, provide models that have worked. Oftentimes, you have lessons learned where in a community you can have a few civil society organizations that were able to successfully register, gather insights, facilitate discussions with those organizations so you can see, what did you do right? What did you do that helped you put this information through quickly? Can you get pro bono accountants or pro bono lawyers that are willing to give guidance? And that's something that can be accomplished in the very short term.
Definitely I'll be able to do that.
So this is an example of how you could use this chart to break it down.
Yeah, and I think it's, with the first and third parts of this tool, each of those sort of focuses on an individual issue. Here's where you can put all your issues together in one place and sort of see really visually. I think this is helpful, especially for people who like to see things visually, about what your priorities will be, and what mapping out a strategy with different steps of addressing a problem.
Exactly, and they build on each other, because if you accomplish this medium-term objective of convincing the government to work with you to provide guidance, then it may help create the conditions where the government is more willing to dialogue with you and to actually explore the consequences, the practical consequences of the re-registration requirement, and that might lead to more openness for legal change.
Yeah. So now that we've gone through the 3 different pieces of the tool, and we just have about 5 minutes left, I want to make sure that we're answering any questions that you might have, or anything that's not clear, something that could that needs to be improved, that's a little fuzzy. Are there any questions?
Yeah, I have a comment to this last section, the part 2. It seems to me that this is more a tool that addresses that analyzes possible solutions rather than issues, right? I mean, it seems to me that this is more about providing a deeper analysis of the responses and better understanding of the responses in relationship to these issues.
Yeah, but I think it does. It helps you figure out what steps you need to take to get the responses you need, and how you might prioritize those. If you go back to part 1, actually this short, medium, and long term about what needs to be done to address the issue is actually drawn from the second line of part 1 about whether the root is in the text of the law or in the way the law is implemented. And that helps you know sort of what your response has to be. or what the response is. So if the response is that if the issue is because of the text of the law, then the response has to be the law needs to change. If the issue is how the law is implemented, then the response can be something like education and dialogue or administrative guidance about the law. And so you're drawing from that that helps you identify your response that you then put into.
Okay.
But I think your observation is a good one, and this is not so much a description of the problem. We are in this chart from the answers that we've plugged in, talking more about how you address it in the short term, how you address it in the medium term, and how you address it in the long term. And there's not a repetition. I mean, for it to be useful, you'd have to explain. Okay, so the first one is about what's the problem. The problem is ambiguous. And a problem is ambiguous and discretionary implementation of the registration law, right? That's the problem. And then how you would address it in the short term. And the medium term, the problem is basically it's the same, right? Ambiguous and discretionary implementation of the registration law. And it could be registration and re-registration because it's the same thing, right? When you have a government that is re-registering, implementing a re-registration requirement, okay? When you are, and this is why we were talking about the different impact on different kinds of organizations. If you are a wealthy, high-resource organization with a team of lawyers and accountants, this re-registration requirement is going to be less complex. If you're a struggling organization working at the grassroots, the re-registration problem is going to be harder, right? It affects different groups in different ways. But the bottom line is the discretionary and ambiguous nature of the law. And the re-registration is the onerous added to the discretionary and ambiguous nature. Anyway, I know we've pretty much run out of time here.
I just wanted to make a couple final points. Basically, when this tool, we didn't do it so you would have a stack of papers to flip through. That's not what we're not trying to make more paper in your life. The point is really to have thought critically about the issues that need to be considered and to be able to collect that in one place and look at things holistically. There's unfortunately not any magic formula for, you plug things into a computer, the situation, and it spits out how you should decide to engage. But we hope that if you, and in our experience doing this, if you think through the different issues that this tool is asking you to think through, you can come up with a strategic approach. So that's what we're aiming to do here. I'm going to type in this middle thing my email address. And that this will also be in the things that are shared afterwards, and the things that are posted on the Wings website. So if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. Again, my email address is rvernon, VERNON, @ICNL.org.
If any of you are interested in giving a shot at filling out the charts and sending them in with suggestions about how they could be improved, we'd be delighted to receive that feedback. And I'll let Rebecca say goodbye, but thank you so much to all of you for your participation. Thank you to Wings for giving us this opportunity to reach out to your members. And it's been a pleasure, and we hope that this is not the end of the conversation.
Thank you very much, Jocelyn, and thank you very much, Rebecca. I think that it was a very good session, and we, of course, encourage everyone in this call to share the tool with their colleagues and to see how we can improve it and make it very useful for all of us. Thank you very much to you all, and we will keep in touch.
Yeah, thank you so much. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Goodbye. Have a good day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.